Right, we're back. All right, so like I said, um, I just lost my place. Initially, it was I interpreted as someone confessing to someone about a secret love or like a secret encounter. But because it does have this message of, like it says, has found out thy bed of crimson joy. Thy bed of crimson joy is really pretty much, in my opinion, interpretation or like reference to bed. In an archaic language, to bed is to go to bed, to go to be intimate, go to have sex, if you will. Yeah, it's bedding. I don't know what kind of culture it is. I don't know if it's British or whatever have you, but like at the end of the weddings, to consummate the marriage, they'll say, it's time to bed the wife, or it's time for a bedding. It's time to do the do. All right, so has found out thy bed of crimson joy gave me the connotation that there is something here that is referencing, like he's confessing about a secret intimacy that he has or whatever, that I guess if it's exposed it will break him. That's it. But in my initial reading, I didn't really perceive it that way. It was that way, but I more so was just like, okay, somebody's sick. Like, is somebody's sick? Somebody has a secret, and somebody's having sex. That's how I interpreted it. I'm like, wait, did somebody catch an STD? So that was my trying not to laugh because it's not. So I'm like, somebody got an STD. Is like that's what it is. Um, it was making me think. Professor just give me. So I'm sorry. He actually charged this. So, all right. So back moving forward, my initial thought, that's how I was thinking. So, like I said, when I was doing the research and I came across the first person after I pretty much solidified my own interpretation of the poem, I started doing research to get other people's opinions because once I switched over from viewing thou and thy as a I and my, you know, definitive. Is that a good word to use? Is that the proper word? That's what I'm going to use it right now. Thou and thou and thy as a I and my definitive, and I switched over to you and your. It changed the whole perception of the poem, and it started making things not make sense at all. For like, not in a literal sense, not in a figurative sense. It just didn't make sense to me at all. So I kind of scratched that. But yeah, so we have, I'm tired of saying so, and I know y'all tired of hearing it. Moving forward, back to, or the guy, okay, like I said, the guy that I researched, he was something about the way he was breaking the poem down was giving me the impression of a plague. Even though he never mentioned plague, he did put emphasis on a sickness and, like someone being sick and, possibly from sick of love and all kinds of stuff. But when you read it, it doesn't really, of course, it's like sick of love. It's like reading it in the sense of you and your, and saying, oh Rose, you are sick. The invisible worm that flies in the night in the howling storm. The invisible worm, me and my upbringing, I've known, I kind of associate worm with like, even though I have other associations, and I'm kind of breaking from the way I kind of want to go through this process, because this wasn't my initial process of dissecting the poem, but this is, like I said, it's kind of where I am now, so it's kind of hard to go back to the initial way, because initially I wasn't going into, oh, the stomach bug. That was like towards the end of, after me already solidifying a perception of the poem. But you can take it as like a stomach. I grew up knowing what a stomach bug was, like kind of like a sickness that you catch in like a day, and it lasts for like a day or two, and eventually you be over. You probably get like diarrhea and all kinds of stuff from it, or a stomach flu. So the invisible worm that flies in the night and the howling storm. I know the poem was presented, I think, in the late 1700s to like 1800s. So back then, I'm under the impression that's like around the time where, people used to have sicknesses and all kinds of stuff, and they didn't know what was going on. It was sweeping nations, plagues going around, all this, kind of like the pox. I don't know. That's the closest thing I can. Well, the best thing I can bring up that people I feel would know about, or being kind of not glorified, but a lot of people know about it. The pox. It was spreading. People didn't know what to do about it. They were trying to solve the problem. Everybody was catching the pox, sick at night. And all. This stanza itself gives me that impression. Like, oh, Rose, you are sick. The invisible bug, that flies through the night. I take that as like sweeping across the nation. Everyone's sick. In the howling storm. Howling storm is like, sweep, like I said, flies in the night, sweeping across the nation in a howling storm, because it's a storm. It's sweeping. It's everybody's catching it. It's a howling. It's an uproar. Ah, shoot! It's an uproar. It's causing an uproar, so to speak. Yeah, and then it goes on to say, has found out thy bed of crimson joy, and his dark secret love does I destroy. So I took that as this is this second stanza. Has found out thy bed of crimson joy. So the bug has found Rose's bed, and now she got it. She, and his dark secret love does thy life destroy. That part is what throws me off, and it takes me away. That's why I started like, okay, it doesn't make sense when I use you and your, because if I'm looking at it from that perspective, oh Rose, you are sick. Rose being, like I said, typically it's associated with women, and that's why I kind of not vacated, but that's probably why initially I was geared more towards just keeping an open mind as far as a Rose possibilities, because I'm an open-minded person anyway, so I kind of don't really put labels on things too much unless it's something that I witness has a label. Yeah, so, oh Rose, you are sick. The invisible worm that flies in the night in the howling storm has found thy bed, has found out thy bed of crimson joy, and his dark secret love I destroy. If Rose is a woman, I'm just gonna break this down, the process I have right now, because it's kind of difficult trying to do that. So the rose, what's the right way to put it? Not so much the rose, but when you look at the actual illustration that they apply initially, the illustration is a picture of it's not a worm, first of all, it's a caterpillar. But they say worm here, but like I said, I didn't have the picture initially. So that wasn't even my my thought process was more authentic. And when I took it as the invisible worm that flies in the night, it's a poem. They use comparisons, they use metaphors. So worm that flies in the night, worms don't fly. And the only thing that resembles a worm that, only thing that can be associated, I took as could be associated with a worm that flies is like a butterfly. And it would make sense because it's like, okay, a caterpillar, worm, caterpillar's cocoon, they, come out, they become butterflies in a cocoon, they gain wings, whatever have you. They become butterflies in the midst of the cocoon, in the darkness, in the night, in the midst of bad weather, to be honest. We gonna get off of that because that was my initial. We're not doing that. I'm just gonna hop into based off the God's procession and the plague. And when you look at the illustration, it is of a woman coming out of a rose. It's a woman in the illustration. It's like vines. It kind of has a very Garden of Eden type of thing to it. That's the best way I can say. So, and it's of a woman kind of emerging out of a rose, but it's also two other pictures of women on a vine, like going into a cocoon or like emerging from a cocoon. I don't know if it's supposed to be the same woman that's emerging out of the rose, out of the at the bottom of the illustration, or is it literally supposed to be like three different women, and then there's a caterpillar up in the left hand corner. I don't know if it's the cat. It's caterpillar turned into beautiful butterfly. Either way, the whole plague situation, it didn't make sense. Me using you and your makes sense once I got to the bottom aspect. Me using you and your, and then thinking of the plague and thinking of the poem being strictly about someone being sick and, getting sick through a plague and now they're like bedridden or whatever, they're dying. And this being the speaker talking to someone that is sick about it, it didn't make sense because now they're saying, and his, and it's like, who's the his? Dark secret, love, does thy destroy? Does they destroy? It destroys her. But the speaker says that it doesn't make sense. The speaker says they're telling this person, "Oh, rose thou art sick. The invisible storm that flies in the night and the howling storm has found out." Okay, so I'm mixing it. Has found out their bed of crimson joy and dark secret love do destroy. Do you destroy? So, O rose thou art sick, the invisible worm that flies in the night in the howling storm has found out thy bed of crimson joy, and his dark secret love does thy destroy. You read it like that, and then the idea of you and your, when he say his, it's kind of like giving a personification to the sickness itself, and identifying the sickness as a he. That part is what's, it can be misleading. All right. So when I did my first research and I got the first person's impression of it, that's what he said. Okay, so he, and it's funny because I actually sent my mother the poem, and her reaction was completely different. He seemed like he was talking more so about like someone that was sick and whatever, and it gave me the impression of like a plague and stuff like that. My mother's impression was like what she said, like the rose. She was saying something, but it was something more like softer. It wasn't very dark. It was completely opposite from this guy's revelation. And then I had researched someone else's, and theirs, hers was similar to his breakdown in the terms of, you know, sickness. And then it was also like it was also mentioned that the his that they're referring to can also be like the devil or something like that, and the devil being the sickness or the worm, so to speak, you know, depicting a worm, you know, because it's more so like of a grotesque type of image, and associating that with the devil. It's just way too much going on with that, that kind of throw me off, because I know poems are meant to use, excuse me, figurative language, but at the same time, the way their approach seems so dark, and then my mother's approach just seems so like, okay, like, yeah, it's beautiful. She said me that, she was like, oh, that's nice. I'm like, nice, like, why would she say that? Like, so I just asked her, I'm like, I was just like, why, just to see what she would say. And when she told me, it was a complete different message. I see how she would interpret that. Did I send her the one with the illustration? No, I didn't send her the original illustration. So she didn't have that to piggyback off to get more of a glimpse. I'm going to actually resend her the poem, but I'm going to send her it with the original illustration and see how she approaches it then. But initially, like I said, hers was just more so like airy. It was lighthearted. It wasn't crazy. And it was genuinely about like love or whatever. Oh, that's what it was. It was more so the worm. She depicted it as the worm's love for the rose, and like the worm making the rose sick. She didn't mention anything about a woman. She didn't mention anything about like a third party or nothing like that. I guess she literally depicted the his part as pertaining to the worm, and she related in a way of the worm was making the rose sick. Possibly the worm was feeding off of the rose or something like that. Whatever. That's how she interpreted it. The other person, he was just like, oh, the worm could be the devil and all kinds of stuff. And I'm not saying that's just, like I said in the beginning, poetry also taps into someone's life experiences. You can say academic experiences, but I don't want to really say academic experience because it also deals with your life experience and what you've encountered, you know, throughout your journey, that forms your, the way you process stuff or the way you perceive stuff or receive stuff. So that's him. And then the other woman I researched, she had kind of like same undertone that he had. Um, but I'm gonna stray away from that, okay? Because I got like 10 minutes left. I may make a part three. I really don't want to. I only said I wanted to do two parts before I started this. So I'm just gonna go from my point of view. Okay. And this, like I said, I didn't want to share it with. I want to share it with the professor. I'm not saying it like that. Like my professor, he seems cool, but I'm in this conspiracy store, and my thoughts is my thoughts, and I don't want nobody walking around, you know, with my thoughts, especially if I'm not getting paid for it. At this point right now, I'm like, yeah, I'm not breaking this down from my point of view because I need to get paid. you know. So I'm gonna just post it and not saying it like that because I don't even think that this video is gonna reach a whole bunch of people. And anybody can literally just take a phone and just record a screen and, get it or just take notes, whatever have you. I don't even care. So it's not that it's more so just the basis of this is my perception, you know? And nobody can think like you. They can relate. But your perception will always be your perception, and it can only be conveyed from your place of being. And that's it. And it's the same thing with this poem. Like even though I break it down and interpret it in a different way, it's I still don't feel like this is how the intended it to be. I feel like especially with the word secret in it, I feel like it's something. I don't know if this is even about the poet themselves or is he creating a character. Like, I don't know how to take this poem in that sense. So it's hard. And it does have an undertone like somebody's keeping a secret in a way. It also has an undertone of like possible reference to homosexuality is something I just find as a I don't know, reading it is like someone speaking to Rose. I'm depicting Rose as being a name, but ignore the name. Ignore it as a name Rose. They're dressing Rose. Okay? Rose is not a person, Rose is not a flower, Rose is not nothing. Just Rose is just a thing. That's how I want to depict this as. Rose is a thing. Okay? That's the best way to put it. And a thing can be a person, it could be a place, or it could be it's a noun. Person, place, or thing. A thing. A thing is a person, place, or a thing. Okay? That's my approach to it. Is a rose can literally depict love itself, and love is not something that is it can be tangible. Like people can show their form people some people's form of affection is tangible things. They might buy you a nice car, that's their way of showing love or whatever. But love itself, the word, the feeling, the emotion, the idea of it is nothing that is attainable, and uh, realistic aspect. It's just it is okay. So a rose, we all know roses to symbolize beauty, love, the color red associated with passion, love, stuff like that. That's you get where I'm going with it. Okay. Rose, rose. Thou art sick. And like I said, this is from my perspective. So after reading it so many times, I take it, okay, I take it as this. So, my initial problem with this poem, like I said, was the first stanza wasn't rhyming. Worm and storm does not rhyme. The second stanza does rhyme. Destroy and joy, they both are they both rhyme, and there's I do understand the overall rhythm of the poem. The my rhythm of the poem is a bit different from the rhythm of the poem of the guy that I researched, the woman I researched, even the Serenade. That was my initial approach to try to gather the rhythm because, like I said, I couldn't get, I couldn't make sense of this poem worth a damn in the beginning because I'm like, it's not flowing. You know, my thing is to make sense, make things flow, make sense of things, and it wasn't flowing. So I kind of wanted, I kind of researched it because I'm like, okay, let me just see if I can find like somebody, you know, read the poem to see how they read it. And I came across some guy's video. I automatically shut it off because I wasn't going to be able to take him seriously. And then I came across the Serenade, and I saw, oh, they have something where they put music to it. And I guess the Serenade was created sometime in the 1900s, I believe, or something like that. Um, and he added music to the poem. And like I said, it's a very gloomy kind of music or whatever, but it's an undertone of sadness, it's an undertone of yeah. So yeah, it's gonna be a part three to this because I'm already at 26 minutes. But he pretty much delivered the poem in a way where, like I said before, it was very dramatic, and that's just not how I interpret a poem. And maybe this can be me projecting my own tone onto the poem. He may be a more expressive person, so that's why he attacked the poem the way he did. Me, I'm a little bit more laid back, so in me reading it is just, more fluent. But then also the way I take the poem, I feel like it's meant to be that way because it seems more like a letter in a way. It kind of seems like a letter. It kind of seems like, you know, the way I was interpreting it, like, because like I said, it didn't make sense. It seemed like a letter, but it also seemed like a statement was being made. But it also made me think like, okay, maybe he's having a conversation with somebody and telling this person this. Maybe it's not a letter. Maybe it's not something he's actually written down. Maybe this is a writing of a conversation that was had. Um, you know, so I don't know. I can just only go off of what I know right now. And what I know right now is how I'm interpreting it. Um, so yeah, so O Rose, thou art sick. The visible worm that, and I keep with this worm part because I literally was having a huge issue with the worm. Like it was getting under my skin so bad. But the conclusion that I came to with worm makes perfect sense, especially for how I'm interpreting it. Because, like I said, it's a poem, it's figurative. Just as much as the poem is creative, you also have to be creative with it. It's not just your thought process and you interpreting things and piecing symbolisms together and metaphors, and using your you literally have to, with this poem, you're going to fully interpret this poem is if you try your best to put yourself in this person's shoes and like just overall like the state of being, like you really have to mentally put yourself in their place of feeling, thinking, you probably not in the same surroundings, but you got to kind of create that environment within yourself in order to get a good understanding of this. So, O rose, thou art sick. And we doing this as my and I. So, O rose, I am sick. The invisible worm, I take that as a worm that doesn't exist, that flies in the night. A worm that doesn't exist, that flies in the night. A worm that's invisible. It's not a worm. There's no real worm. You're referencing a worm, but there is no worm because it's invisible. You can't be a worm and be invisible at the same time, um, especially if you're flying. Worms usually go underground. You can disappear underground, but you're not disappearing into thin air. I'm watching you fly off. It's that's how I'm envisioning it. So that led me, without the illustration, that led me to think, okay, invisible worm that flies in the night, in the howling storm. The invisible worm that flies in the night depicts a worm that flies in the night. An invisible worm that flies. Caterpillars has a wormy look. Cater, cat, cater, Caterpillars also, initially I'm like, live in cocoons. That's how my mind went. They live in cocoons. Okay, they do go into cocoons to transform into something that flies. A butterflies. What is a cocoon? A cocoon is shelter darkness. It's almost like a womb, a woman's womb, a baby, a fetus. It's was my process, So the invisible worm that flies in the night, flies just as much as flies can relate to the butterfly wings. Flies can also relate to transcending. Transcending, you also got to play with words. Transcending can also be a formative for transitioning. Flies is soaring. It's going. Sometimes people not use flies, but when you hear flies, it's a sense you got to take of its essence. It's a sense of flying. You're taking off. You're going. You're doing more. You're doing better. You're becoming something different. You understand what I'm saying? So, in essence, a worm that flies in the night, butterflies fly, but they also transform. They also take off. They also become different. Caterpillars also have that worm like appearance, also take in essence a rose. A rose is beautiful. There's something, an undertone of beauty in this as well, you know? Butterflies are beautiful. It goes from a caterpillar which is not perceived as too appealing to most people, but some people like insects and some people think caterpillars look dope, and they do. Worms, I'm not really too much of a fan of a worm. I think a worm and a caterpillar are look like two different species. Like, I don't see a depiction. So yeah, I don't really care for that aspect too much, but you understand what I'm saying, hopefully. So, O rose, thou art sick, the invisible worm that flies in the night in the howling storm. Butterfly that flies in the night, in the howling storm, a butterfly that transitions or becomes more. Take out, let's negate from butterfly and caterpillars and worms, just the essence of something. O rose, thou art sick. The invisible worm. invisible also plays a huge part because it's kind of like referencing it's it's hard to explain. The invisible worm is I take it as the poet is kind of is like he's trying to lead you into being imaginative, and that's why I'm saying like you really have to put yourself in a place of the poet's being and really become like the poet, because that's the only way you're gonna, I feel like, I don't want to say like it's a definite thing, like say, oh, that's the only way you're gonna be able to break it down, because I could be completely wrong. It's just my way of breaking it down. That's the only way I can break this down to make it make sense. Well, not make sense, because it makes sense in all aspects that in which that I have received it. You know, it's it, considering other people's interpretations, but as far as mine, I'm gonna make a part three.